We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
What's up, guys? It's three-time NFL Pro Bowler, all-decade return specialist, Josh Cribbs. I want to welcome you to the Mac Sports Connection podcast, where Alex hosts all things Mac, all things football, all things sports, right here, Mac Sports Connection, baby. The Mid-American Conference best, bringing only the great Mac to everyone.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Mac Sports Connection podcast, the number one podcast for all things Mid-American Conference sports, part of the Varsity Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex. Joining me, as always, is Graham. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Graham, how are you this week?
I am pumped this week. You know, this week is National Championship Week, so we're pumped about that. That's we're heading into like the midst of conference play in basketball. And really just a great week for sports as we get closer and closer to spring training. I'm getting more and more exciting for baseball season. It's a good week, Alex.
We've got some cool things planned for that one as well, including in the works, trying to get a current UT head baseball coach, Rob Reinstedel, on the show. Got to hammer out some dates with him, but the game plan is to have him on the show. Was going to do that a year ago, but here we are a year later. Sorry, Coach, took us that long to get you on, but it's going to be a good one. I'm really looking forward to that one. And yeah, baseball, man, it's best time of year where we're seeing these pro teams get ready for major league camp. Our college teams are starting to plan their Florida spring tournament trips, and yeah, it's going to be great.
You gotta love Midwest spring sports starting in the winter, in the midst of winter. We start our spring sports and we go, yeah, we're going to go ahead and start with some baseball. And of course, that's going to start in Florida. And then we got tennis going on, and that's all going on outdoors, I'm sure. No, it's not. I love it. I love the spring sports. And even though we maybe should not call them spring sports if we start them in January, but that's neither here nor there. In the MAC going on this week, lots of basketball. Did you get a chance to watch any MAC basketball over the weekend?
I got a little bit of a chance to watch some basketball. It's pretty impressive what some of these teams are doing. Yeah, if I can just kind of talk in the women's side, Ball State is 7-0 in the Mid-American Conference. They're sitting at 15-4 overall. And I would be very remiss if I did not mention their current superstar, Allie Becky, who had a solid game today against the Toledo Rockets. You guys will be hearing this later this week, so by the time you hear this, it'll be this past Monday. But Toledo and Ball State battled it out, and this one was in Muncie, 77-63. Ball State just ran away with this one, and I'm really starting to think Ball State might be the class of the Mid-American Conference on the women's side.
Yeah, I mean, that's so far so good. And you're right, Allie Becky, someone we talked about a lot at last year's MAC tournament and putting her on that all tournament team, talking about potentially the best player in the MAC at that point. Certainly this far in the season, probably the best player in the MAC, and she has looked incredible so far. And for a Ball State team that came up against a tough Toledo squad today, came out victorious. Yeah, Ball State's looking great.
They have dominated here in the first half of conference play, but right on their heels, you've got Buffalo, Kent State, and Western Michigan all sitting at 4-2 in conference play. So 2.5 games back. Toledo now moves to 5th in the Mid-American Conference, and they're in sole possession of 5th place. Still very much alive and secure for the conference tournament in March. Again, we have plenty of time until then, but Ball State really head and shoulders above everybody else right now. But again, Buffalo, they've looked pretty good. That, they do have 2 losses to Kent State and then obviously Ball State, but they've rebounded nicely with a win over Eastern Michigan and Ypsi, and then a home win over Miami this past week in a tough battle with Miami, 59-51. Shalia Watson has been, again, excellent. Arguably you're talking about best players in the conference, arguably the best player in the conference. If you're a Ball State faithful or if you're a Buffalo faithful, there's a really strong argument for this one. And I think it's going to come down to Allie Becky or Shalia Watson.
Yeah, excited to see this Ball State Buffalo matchup come tournament time. I think this is going to be a big one in the women's tournament. Moving over to the men's side, at the top of the men's basketball standings, we have Miami, 5-0 in conference play, 13-4 overall, sitting on a 7-game win streak. Miami's looked really impressive this year so far, and nipping at their heels, also 5-0 in conference play, is Akron, 12-5 overall on a 5-game win streak. So clearly the class of the conference right now, Miami and Akron. We have Ohio 4-1 in conference play. Following that, Toledo also 4-1 in conference play. Got to watch them this weekend against the Ball State squad, and really a game that was close until it wasn't, and then Toledo ran away with that one. And then Kent State rounding out the top 5. Although we have a lot of teams sitting at 2-3. Kent State having the best overall record among them at 11-6. This Miami team has looked great so far this year, undefeated in conference play, a team that we didn't expect to be this good. And we'll see if things keep up that way for Miami. But yeah, so far so good. The Akron Zips, we did expect to be at the top of the conference, and they are. And speaking to that, we got the Akron Zip gets the Player of the Week honors announced today. It's Amani Lyles is a forward for Akron. He had a couple of career nights this past week. The Zips went 2-0 this week. Amani averaged 16.5 points, shooting 14 of 18 from the field and 4 of 5 from the free throw line. He was also clutch for the Zips with 31 of his 33 points coming in the second half. So, how wild is that? He scores 2 points in the first half of his 2 games and then 31 points in the second half of those games. So really coming up big. 9 rebounds, 8 assists, 5 blocks, and 2 steals on the week. That's Lyles went up against, and Lyles and the Zips went up against a at that point undefeated Toledo squad and took them down. So really securing that first place spot for the Zips, and Lyles well deserved Player of the Week.
Well, and I think hats off to Lyles, of course, but I don't think people, unless you really pay attention to MAC basketball, you understand just how big winning Player of the Week honors is, especially with the week they had. Both Ohio and Toledo were undefeated in conference play. And Akron took care of business. It looks like they took care of business at home for both of those. But Akron took care of business against 2 previously undefeated, tied for first place teams. And they did it in relative dismantling fashion. These weren't, one possession victories. They beat Ohio by 12 points. They beat Toledo by, I think, 8 points, 9 points. And next up on the chopping block, they've got Buffalo before a clash of undefeateds once again in Miami and Akron on the 25th. So on Saturday. So if those 2 can get through their Tuesday night slate unscathed, we've got yet another battle in which Akron gets to put its undefeated streak in conference play on the line. And I got to tell you, I'm really excited for Saturday's game.
Well, as this conference play starts heating up, we're going to see more of these battles, and we're really going to see how the conference shakes out. Akron is at Buffalo on Tuesday, and then Miami comes to Akron. Have you gotten a chance to see a game at the Jar ever?
I've never seen a game at the Jar. That's on my bucket list for MAC play. I would love to get out to the Jar sometime and just catch an Akron basketball game.
Growing up in Akron, went to a bunch of games at the Jar as a kid, and then even more since then. And I got to tell you, they have the best popcorn in the MAC. They just do. That's that James A. Rhodes Arena. They're doing something right with their popcorn. I love the Jar. It's great. The walking track around the upper level makes it hard to see the floor at times, and it's great in that way. And the students, those Zips faithful, go crazy for those games. So it's a blast, and I have no hard time imagining why the Zips are undefeated this year with so many games at home lately. And yeah, I imagine that they will have that advantage, that home court advantage, when they come against Miami on Saturday.
Well, and I got to tell you, I really, really think that it's going to be really special for Akron. I mean, John Gross has done just such a great job in Akron, and it's really incredible. I mean, they've been in the NCAA tournament twice in the last 3 years, all in part due to the history of Akron basketball. But of course, you gotta tip your hat to John Gross and what he's been able to do. And you're right. From everything I've seen, James A. Rhodes Arena is special. And I think now you've inspired me to suggest that we do a MAC popcorn rating at some point. We do a stadium popcorn rating. In fact, we might tell you guys what would you like us to rank, and we'll rank them, and we'll tell you why we're right and why you're wrong.
That's funny. That's I don't know if we need to take a trip around the MAC to do a popcorn rating, but I can tell you, of the places I've been, that Jar popcorn just hits different. And I don't mean popcorn from a jar. It's in a cardboard box, just like everybody else. But it's at the James A. Rhodes Arena. That popcorn really does it for me.
I love it. So it might be the winningest popcorn in the Mid-American Conference if you're Graham's taste buds. But speaking of winning, we have a national champion in the Mid-American Conference in the form of Bowling Green cheerleading. You don't hear that very often, but the Falcons took home a small co-ed Division 1A championship with an overall score of 85.6, beating out schools like Minnesota en route to that championship. So I just wanted to make sure we gave our hats off to that and for what they've been able to do. I'm looking at some of these other schools that won titles. University of Mississippi, University of Alabama. Like you're now etched in history with these other programs who won a national championship this year in other categories. So hats off to the Falcons. What a great trophy to bring back. They were down in Florida this last week, competed against all these teams, and yeah, hats off to the Falcons.
Yeah, and anytime you get to see a national championship coming from the conference, it's exciting to see that happening. And as much as it pains me to congratulate BG on anything, this BG cheerleading squad certainly did a great job. And against, I don't know if you saw this on social media, but a lot of these routines were out there in videos, and all of them incredible. Just incredible athleticism in all of these routines, and for BG to walk away the champions is just super impressive.
It really is. And they've always done a great job at Bowling Green with their spirit squads, with their cheerleading squads. So once again, Falcon faithful, congrats, you have a national champion at Bowling Green. So go celebrate them and enjoy that victory. Cheer on your cheerleaders. That sounds a little bit redundant, maybe, I don't know, but cheer on your cheerleaders, buy them a drink downtown, and celebrate that victory. Before we get into our next topic, I wanted to talk to you guys about the Varsity app by Lairfield. It's free to download on the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. With the Varsity app, you can listen to all of your favorite Division I college teams, hear calls from voices across the MAC, Big Ten, SEC, and more. You can sign in, save your favorite schools, sports, and content from those schools for easy access. Almost more importantly, you'll be able to find hundreds of amazing podcasts through the Varsity Podcast Network, including fan favorites such as the Max Sports Connection podcast, the Group of Five podcast, the Sickos Committee podcast, and many, many more. Download the Varsity app today for free. Start listening to the calls and podcasts that bring your favorite teams to life. We have yet another interesting topic. I feel like we're gonna be blessed with interesting topics as the NCAA has continued to meet and reshape college sports. Graham, it's this one is no different than the last one in terms of how it affects student athletes and the schools involved. But there is potential legislation for a flat guarantee of 5 years of eligibility. And I think it's important to address this because we've seen time and time again how many students are applying for a 5th year of eligibility, 6th year, 7th year even due to injuries, whatever. This would effectively become you get 5 years to play college sports. That's it. Like doesn't look like there's going to be a bunch of red shirt. It's going to be here it is.
That's kind of what's in place now. The suggestion is all over the place. There's a bunch of these lawsuits out there. The big one is the Wade lawsuit coming against the NCAA. This is John Wade is a basketball player from Southern Mississippi who kind of a surprising result here as he enters school at 5'10" and shoots up to 6'4". Every 5'10" person's dream. I had that dream in college too. Wanted to shoot up to 6'4" during my time in college. Didn't work out for me, but did work out for John Wade, who shot up to 6'4", got some time on the basketball team, but unfortunately, the way that your 5-year eligibility period works is the clock starts as soon as you start at a school. And so the as this 5-year eligibility includes a redshirt year, John Wade is applying for a 6th year on the condition that he grew, which is normally not not one of the conditions that the NCAA grants a waiver for. So part of this lawsuit is arguing that especially with the House settlement that we've seen coming through, it looks like it's going to allow institutions to directly pay their players. With that settlement, we're seeing a lot of these lawsuits that are arguing antitrust lawsuits, saying that the NCAA, now that these institutions are paying their players, whether in the form of NIL or especially if you were directly seeing revenue sharing, when that happens, because these players are now employees, the question is, are these organizations, are these institutions allowed to make these decisions about employment that normally would be banned by antitrust legislation? So the argument here is that the NCAA is unfairly restricting Wade's right to work, and from that, the argument, it's opening up the door for college athletes to have unlimited eligibility as long as they are full-time students at member institutions. The suggestion here might be there are no more eligibility restrictions, at least in terms of years played.
In unrelated news, I am going to be trying out for the Ohio Bobcats football team next year.
I love that for you. I love that for you. I mean, I suspect that you won't make it, not because of eligibility concerns, but I love that for you. We know that the Bobcats have had great coaching, and despite the coaching change this year, I'm sure they will continue to have great coaching. They just have that culture of success, and as a full-time student at Ohio, you are certainly eligible to play for the football team if this Wade lawsuit goes through.
Dreams may become realities one day, but I think all of this is really interesting, right? And I want to be clear. I am very much in favor of NIL, students getting the opportunity to get paid. I made a probably a really terrible parallel. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me, listeners, and of course, Graham. But I was talking to somebody the other day, student athletes or student musicians at universities were never subject to NIL regulations because they weren't participating in collegiate athletics. But here's the thing. One of the big things that was kind of the catalyst behind the NCAA regulations is you're considered amateur athletes. You're not professional. You're not going to be treated like a professional. You can earn a scholarship, but any improper benefits such as payment outside of athletics, payments from boosters, payments from, or getting opportunities because of who you are, all of that was impermissible. I challenge that it should have been a blanket thing across universities as a whole, or it should have never been a thing. Music students often get an opportunity to play in the university ensembles. They get scholarships at the university, and they're perfecting their craft through their academics. They also get, because of who they are and because of where they're growing, they get opportunities externally, payment, opportunities to play, performances, recording. There's a myriad of other things. And again, I recognize it's not a perfect parallel, but I really think it's interesting that we see some students restricted because of what they're good at, while other students get free reign to do whatever because they're good at something, and they get notoriety because they're good at that thing. If I was, let's say, Quinyon Mitchell, right, out of the University of Toledo, and nobody knew who I was. Let's say I was a nobody player. Would it really have been an improper benefit to receive something just because I was on the football team, but nobody knew who I was? I challenge that it wasn't. Like, nobody knows I'm on the football team. I'm getting something everybody else is getting. To me, it just feels like all this whole argument of NIL payments and not payments, it's been a farce, and it's been a farce for years. And it's finally just they've opened a can of worms they can no longer shut.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm super following your argument here. It seems like you're arguing both sides of the coin, Alex, but
I'm trying to.
That's I think what makes sense here is that universities and to a lesser extent other organizations like the NCAA football game, video game, that is, have been benefiting from players' names and likenesses for years. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many Justin Fields jerseys I saw when he was at Ohio State. And so the idea that universities have been making money, not just off of these student athletes' accomplishments on the field in terms of championships and wins and things like that, but also in terms of just memorabilia, imaging, and licensing, things like that. The idea that the university, at the NCAA, that these outside organizations can make money off of that, but the athletes themselves, the people whose name and likeness we are making money off of, can't receive those benefits, has always been a little bit suspect. And mm-hmm. and of course we understand this idea that the NCAA is trying to promote a fair and equal playing field across sports, and that makes it harder when we open the door to NIL stuff. But I think from a fundamental level, it's hard to make an argument that athletes don't deserve these NIL deals. And yes, as schools start to organize boosters and NIL collectives and all of this that makes NIL funding easier for larger institutions and for institutions that have larger booster bases. There's an argument that it's kind of making college sports uneven, especially at the top. But I don't know an argument for the other way. I can't find an argument that ethically makes sense to me where you say we're going to take away these NIL deals from players. And then this idea that the university should be sharing revenue with players, this house settlement idea, that makes sense to me too. Again, when we talk about collegiate sports, I think it's been said a million times, and I'll say it once more. The football is the only profitable sport at the collegiate level. Most sports across the collegiate landscape lose money for their universities. And so for a long time, the argument was, well, if we pay players, no sports are going to bring in any money for the university. But that's not the job of the university. The job of the university is not to make money off of sports. Remember, again, this argument that the amateur status is important, that comes from the idea that universities are places of higher learning, and the additional activities they offer are just incentives to get students to attend the university. If that were still the case, then the amateur argument makes sense. But nobody's making the argument that college sports aren't big business. They're certainly big business, all of them now. And so this idea that student athletes are not employees of the university, it doesn't make any sense. So I don't think there's an argument for returning to amateur status for collegiate athletes. The NCAA for too long wanted to reap the benefits of both sides. They wanted to increase the amount of money in sports with these corporate sponsorships and with this idea of making things bigger and bigger, television deals and all of that. And as they've done that, they've created this really large collegiate sports monstrosity. And you can't walk it back. You have to decide, is this going to be amateur? Is this going to be a bunch of schools who put together their students and their assistant coach is a player and their head coach is a former player? Or is this going to be big business? And it's too late. It's been big business for too long. And so the argument that athletes aren't part of this big business, it just seems ridiculous to me.
Well, and I think what we're going to ultimately end up seeing too, right, is at some point, I think regulations are going to come down on NIL. I'm 100% not against NIL payments. I firmly believe players should be receiving the money or money for the work that they put in on the field, on the court, whatever. I think we're going to see regulations come down where there's going to be some sort of cap. And I don't know if that's a salary cap, an NIL cap, whatever, but I think that that's the next evolution to this, right?
Well, that's an interesting point because there have been arguments made for years that professional sports in this country have gotten away with antitrust violations because we simply say that's an exception. It's okay that these leagues negotiate in a monopoly type way, and the way we get around that is we have players unions in each of these sports that make arguments and come to agreements with ownership. But certainly there's an argument that everything that is done in these sports is in a way that violates these antitrust laws. Especially a salary cap. This idea that employees can only be paid so much money. Can you imagine if they did that in any other industry? They said, sorry, that's you've reached your salary cap for your accountants at your firm. You're going to have to just buy cheaper accountants, I guess. That's
no, and I think that's a fair point. I think for my argument, I think that the salary cap keeps everybody from flocking to one school, right? I think that for me, it's this idea that there is a competitive balance. If you're saying, hey, schools, you can only spend $25 million in NIL across your football team this year, how whatever it may be. I think in doing so, you're keeping at least a little bit of competitive balance to it, because now such and such player whose NIL value may be $350,000 a year. Well, now he's not going to go to Alabama because they can't even pay him that because they've paid a bunch of other players. He may go to a Power 5 school that has less of a reputation. He may go to a Group of 5 school who can afford to pay him. Like, hey, we're trying to bring in more players at about your pay level. I think there's a real argument for a competitive balance in all of this. My other concern, however, not just for NIL payments, but my other concern is this coupled with the 2-year eligibility for JUCO, because now this 5 years doesn't count against that. So now you're looking at potential 7 years of participating in collegiate athletics.
Well, again, the flat 5 thing is kind of what we have now. That's not a new proposal. That's what
it's
we have now.
It's not a new proposal.
So
my argument.
The new proposal is no eligibility restrictions. And so at least the arguments on the table now are to allow players to have greater eligibility, and we're kind of leaving it up in the air. But at this point, there isn't a separate proposal. The proposal is what we have now, which is 5 years of eligibility, with a ticking clock for the NCAA that starts the moment you play collegiate athletics. Your 5-year eligibility window opens, and you can redshirt one of those years to extend your window to 5 years. But the way that works is you have a ticking clock. The way the JUCO eligibility requirements work right now is there is no ticking clock. You can play your first 2 collegiate seasons at the JUCO level as long as you are a student at a junior college that is one of these participating institutions, which means that you can play your first 2 seasons there. So you could play your first season as an 18-year-old kid and then come back at 30 years old and play your second season. You're allowed to play your first 2 seasons. It doesn't start a ticking clock that way, but you do only have 2 years at the JUCO level right now. And as always, there's no age limit at JUCO. There's no age limit in the NCAA. I've seen a lot of fans argue that this means that 28-year-olds could go up against 18-year-olds. That's always been the case. We've seen it happen, especially for folks who come back from other careers, whether they're coming back from their religious missions that we see, or coming back from the military. Sometimes folks coming back from professional sports and now finally doing college, a la J.R. Smith. But we do see that happen pretty frequently when older students become athletes later. So that has already happened. But what's interesting is this argument that because the NCAA has made this very clear, the vast majority of collegiate athletes do not go pro or go pro in something other than sports, as the commercial says. This idea that you're going to limit athletes to however many years of eligibility, I think there's a strong argument that you can't do that, because these athletes only have earning power in their sport while they're in college, because again, most of them won't go pro. So again, where we put it in the realm of accountants, it would be like saying you can only be an accountant for 5 years and then you got to find something else to do. You can't restrict a worker's rights. They have skills that they've used to pay the bills, and those skills, when we limit the amount of time they can use those skills to make money, it's a violation of those workers' rights. So I think the NCAA is going to quickly run into a lot of legal issues now that we've opened the door for this opportunity for athletes to be paid. More and more, it's looking like college sports is going to look a lot like professional sports.
I'm liking it to minor league sports. I think that's, especially for football, I think that's exactly what we're going to see, is that football is going to be a new variant of essentially a minor league football. And it may not be a variant, it may be the new standard of what minor league football will officially look like.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we talk about minor leagues, generally these are feeder leagues. These are leagues that go to the larger league, and that's not exactly how college football works, right? It's not that the Ohio State Buckeyes directly feed into the Cleveland Browns. Thank goodness. It's that all of college football feeds this draft, and it's kind of interesting to view them as a minor league. It seems to me as just a separate league. It's a little bit the way independent baseball works. is we have these professional independent baseball leagues throughout the country. And if you have one near you, I recommend you check it out because they generally have a lot of fun things going on. But independent baseball, similar to minor league baseball in that it's professional baseball with players who are not currently at the major league level, generally being paid less. As terms of indie baseball goes, most of those teams do not pay players enough for that to be their only job.
Mm-hmm.
But indie baseball, those players, in order to reach MLB teams, need to be signed to those MLB teams. It's not a call up. It's either these players have to enter the draft. Some of them still have draft eligibility, but most of them are just have to be signed directly to MLB teams, offered a contract in that way. So, it's kind of interesting the way this works. If we're going to call it a minor league, but certainly, as players get paid, it's hard to argue that this isn't professional sports.
Mm-hmm.
And if it is professional sports, I don't know how you can limit players in terms of years of eligibility. As long as they're a full-time student, as long as the university says you can continue to take classes, why not? I would love to see my surgeon dunking on somebody.
See, so I think that when we talk about if this now becomes the next evolution in potential professional sports, I think that there needs to be contracts in place. I know players sign scholarships. I know, all of that. I think if this is the route it's going to go, there needs to be contracts.
Certainly. Yeah.
Now I do think, and this is a somewhat unpopular opinion, and I recognize that. But I do think there needs to be NIL penalties for players opting out of bowl games that are not draft.
And that should be written into the contracts. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There needs to be something in place
for not playing.
There needs to be something. Well, it needs to protect the schools and the players, right? You need to protect both sides.
That professional sports work, if you don't show up to practice, you can be fined. That's these kind of things that are already in professional sports contracts. What's interesting is, as I said, a lot of these professional sports leagues get grandfathered in under antitrust legislation. They don't have to adhere to it quite as strictly as most other industries. With collegiate athletics kind of just becoming professional, it's interesting whether they would be grandfathered in under that. And if they're not, the suggestion would be that you can't apply salary caps and that you can't dissuade other people from joining the league. So the more this opens up, the more it opens up kind of frightening possibilities. The consideration of, do teams even have to be associated with a university?
Mm-hmm.
Could you stop those teams from joining the league? I don't know what the answer to that question is. I'm not a lawyer, but I think the more that we open up these lawsuits, we're going to quickly find where the boundaries are, but it's going to take a few years to shake out. And I do think that when we talk about competitive balance, we're going to find where that balance is. Are there players out there who are willing to sit on teams and make money and potentially lose your opportunity to be seen by professionals? Are there players who are going to be okay with being a professional college athlete instead of a professional athlete? Mm-hmm. Are there players who are willing to stay in college as long as they possibly can and play basketball or football or baseball or soccer or whatever their sport is, instead of going on to the professional ranks? And if that's the case, what does that mean for both the professional ranks as well as the ranks of high school athletes who are attempting to enter these universities, who are attempting to gain scholarships, who dreamed of playing college sports? I think it's going to be an interesting landscape going forward, because we've seen the rise of additional leagues. You talk about these minor leagues. We've seen the rise of developmental leagues now, where players can enter these leagues instead of going to college. I think the rise of paying players in college is going to incentivize more of those players to enter the collegiate ranks, which would seem to be a good thing. But maybe it dissuades high school athletes who will no longer have the opportunity to start on these collegiate teams. When you're competing against 25, 26, 28-year-olds on the roster, it's harder for an 18, 19-year-old kid to break into those starting ranks. So maybe those kids get look to the developmental leagues instead. Maybe those kids go to JUCO, since those JUCO years don't count anymore. I think what seems obvious is that we're going to see longer collegiate careers.
Yeah, I think so. But, we're seeing, players sit here for 6-7 years now. We're going to start seeing up to, I really see up to 10 years. We're going to see guys playing in college athletics till they're 28, 29. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. I very much think that there needs to be a lot of regulatory things set up. Again, not to harm the potential for a player. I do think you bring up a great point about their window of athletic earnings being, for most of them, mostly just in college. But I think safeguards need to be in place to protect the athletes, to protect the universities. And I for me, the one thing that kind of jumps out, I similar to like other contracts, I really think that you should not be eligible. And this is a very, very bad take, I recognize. You should not be eligible for NIL money until after you are already enrolled at that university. And when I say that, I mean a recruit out of high school who has not played a snap or taken a practice at that university should not be eligible for NIL money to lure them to that university, to use that as a method to lure them. I think any freshman should be ineligible until after they are already on campus. And I know that's not a great take. But
your suggestion of contracts solves that problem.
Yeah.
If you offer somebody a contract, it is a promise of future payment. And so you can lure your athletes in with these contract offers. And then as soon as the athlete signs the contract, they're an employee, they can start getting paid, but also they are held to the bounds of that contract. Mm-hmm. So it is an opportunity to lock down athletes, in a way that NIL doesn't. Right now in the Wild West of the NIL, you can receive payment for your name, image, likeness, and then move, not even attend school. We've seen that a couple of times already, where athletes have received NIL money and then gone to a different school. I think that's an interesting situation right now in terms of NIL. The nice thing about paying players is that you can bring in contracts, and I know I said I'm not a lawyer, and that the nice thing is contracts, and that's something only a lawyer would say. But when it comes down to it, the terms of contracts could make it so we see less jumping from team to team. Mm-hmm. Now, what's interesting is, can you trade a collegiate athlete if they're under contract? Can you trade an athlete, knowing that inherently athletics at the collegiate level is tied to academics?
Well, that's going to be the one right there. I don't think it's going to be a trade in the sense of, hey, we'll trade you your backup quarterback for our number 2 wide receiver. I don't think we're going to see it that, but it's going to be an expanded transfer portal in which we see a lot more activity that kind of skirts under the academics. We already see it. Students who are great athletes get without saying it, preferential treatment on enrollment standards at some universities. I think that we're going to see, they don't meet our transfer enrollment, but we know it'll help our football team. We'll work with them and get them up to snuff, like whatever it may be. But I think there needs to be a flat standard.
But right now, what we're seeing is these transfers are, if not, directly, initiated by the players. Sometimes we do hear terms of coaches doing a little bit of tampering. And certainly we know that happens. But at least from perspective, it looks like players are the ones who are making the final decision on where they go. We know in professional trades, a lot of times players don't get the opportunity to make the decision to which team they go to. Sometimes you get traded to a team and that's where you're playing. I think it's interesting to look at it and see, could you do that in college? Could you make a player go to a different team simply because they're under contract with you? And if that's the case, if you can trade a player's contract, it's interesting to think about the academic ramifications, because we know not every program is offered by every school. So could you make a player really change institutions when it might affect what their major is? And I think as things become more professional, quote unquote professional, we're going to see more of these things pop up where we go, I didn't even think about that. Could that possibly happen? Could players get traded? Could you get traded for baseball bats? Could you get traded for a player to be named later?
Hey, that recruit that you had your eye on, yeah, he's ours now.
Isn't that interesting? That's
another way to look at it.
You make an offer to a university, and athletic director is going, if I could bring in a little more cash to this university, maybe I get my bonus this year. Maybe we sell off a player. And I think that's an interesting choice. I mean, the obvious answer is to just say no. You can't trade players at the collegiate level. But I think the same way these players are filing lawsuits, it's pretty easy to conceive of a university filing suit saying that we deserve the opportunity to trade players. And who knows where we end up. But I think we're in for at least a few more years of these back and forth lawsuits trying to figure out exactly where the boundaries are.
No, I think you're spot on. It's lots of interesting things to look at and talk over here in the coming years. And I'm excited. I think change is coming, more change is coming. And we'll talk about some more of those changes soon. But Graham, anything else you wanted to add before we close this thing out tonight?
No, I mean, I think as far as our listeners go, I would love to hear from you. What's the wildest situation you can imagine when it comes to these, whether it's a 50-year-old athlete commanding NIL money because they used to be a fitness influencer on Instagram, or it's a team trading one of their starters to another university in exchange for science lab equipment. What's the wildest situation you can imagine happening from this new opening to the professional ranks of collegiate athletics? I'd love to hear what you guys come up with.
Drop your responses on Instagram, Twitter, wherever you see the podcast. Drop those responses. Yeah, I'd love to read some of those on air next week. Should be interesting. Well, Graham, thank you for joining me once again this week. Guys, thank you for tuning in once again this week. You can check out the podcast anywhere podcasts are available, including Apple Podcast, YouTube, Google Podcast, Spotify, now officially on Amazon Music. That's exciting. So if you want to hear our smooth voices convey mediocre takes, check us out on Amazon Music. Again, you can follow us on social media at the MSC Podcast over on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. It's now up again, so you can follow us on TikTok at the MSC Podcast. Maybe next week it'll be gone. Who knows? But you can follow us on TikTok there as well. And then, of course, on YouTube at MSC Podcast. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We really, really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week.